You have to start talking about the festival, I think, by talking about the city. And Rotterdam is an unusual city in that during the Second World War it was almost completely destroyed, just bombed to pieces. There are very few buildings left in the city from before that time. And what happened after the war was that the city was more or less completely rebuilt with a lot of labor from immigrants. You had a lot of Surinamis coming in and people from the former colonial territories. So, to the level where even to this day, about half the population comes from somewhere else. So it's an international place. And I think that the festival is a reflection of that. You have a lot of amazing work from around the world.
In Sundance, it seemed that most of the movies, at least that I saw, were sticking to those fairly clear-cut notions of what a narrative movie should be, and here I saw much more work that is less conventional in that way. There's definitely this sense of this being a waiting room. This is true of Sundance, definitely, a waiting room for young talent to move on to bigger things, or to move on to bigger projects, and I think that one of the questions that we should ask ourselves today is how effective it is as a waiting room. Because
we looked at this list, you can find it on Wikipedia, by the way, of all the Tiger Award winners from Rotterdam over the last 20-odd years. Rotterdam gives 3 Tiger Awards for the competition films every year. So basically we looked at 60-plus award winners, and out of those 60 films and 60 names, I only recognized about 5 or 6.
5 or 6, yeah. I mean, it was 5 or 6 for each of us. I mean, there were different names usually. Sure. It can be depressing a little bit, like especially here where, as you said, the focus is so much on young filmmakers. Right. I mean, there's the Bright Future section. The main competition is also only for first and second features, so it seems like the place to start your career.
There's the Hubert Balls Fund, a very generous global filmmaking fund that supports filmmakers from all over the world, especially developing countries.
Nuri Bilge Ceylan won, for example, early in his career and made Distant as a result of that.
Okay. So maybe we don't have that kind of full scope of just the influence that this festival has, looking beyond the Tiger winners, just people who've been funded through Rotterdam funding programs and that sort of thing. Let's recuse you since you are a juror. Mikhail and I can both make our best pitch to Aaron.
Sure. Okay. And the viewers should look at your reactions closely to discern the movie that I liked the most was Elle, the Greek feature. The plot is basically focused on this driver who is engaged in this strange quest of delivering honey to a local rich man, which isn't in any way explained or even elaborated upon. It's just he has this very simple notion of what he's supposed to be doing, which is delivering jars of honey. I mean, it's definitely sort of steeped in that let's say dogtooth-like sensibility with a lot of deadpan humor, absurdist situations. Actually, Greece is probably on the verge of developing a school pretty much like the Romanians did a couple of years ago. It's definitely as different from the Romanian one as one can imagine, but there is a sort of group sensibility and at least a trial to work out a new language, which is exciting to see. So.
Egan Stone, a young teenage girl, she was actually left by her biological parents to stay with her uncle and aunt. And her relationship with the uncle and aunt is not good. And the more you learn, the more you realize just how dysfunctional it is. And it really is also a reflection of how women are treated, especially girls in China. They're treated as inferior to boys, somewhat unwanted. That's kind of reflective in all these different vignettes that the film kind of lays out in this incredibly immaculately filmed HD camera work. First time I watched it, I thought it was very pretty, but I had a hard time really kind of piecing it together until I kind of realized what the kind of twist is that is revealed somewhere in the towards the end. But I watched it the second time, and this time the pieces really fell into place. And it's a really well-crafted film. It really reminds me of how Hou Xiaoshen's films were constructed, where you see one scene then the next, and only until you get to the third or fourth scene do all the scenes sort of congeal into a meaning. In that regard, it's highly accomplished filmmaking, and it's the director's first film. Huang Ji is her name, and I'm really looking forward to more films by her.
Right.
Julio Bressane is a Brazilian filmmaker who has been making funny, touching, very exciting, great movies for about 45 years now. He was part of a movement that was basically the major avant-garde movement in Brazil called Cinema Marginal. This year, at the Rotterdam Film Festival, programmers Gabe Klinger and Gerwin Tomsma have put together a retrospective. They all were made in an area of Sao Paulo called the Boca do Lixo, or Mouth of Garbage, which is a very poor area, basically a slum. But out of this poverty and this hardship, and during a moment of government oppression and suppression from a military dictatorship, a group of filmmakers made incredibly exciting, daring, formally adventurous work, and also damn funny. The first half of the retrospective takes place from about 65 through 75, where you had the avant-garde movement, and over time, as it got popular, it transitioned to more accessible comedy, much of which included naked people, and once that caught on, it turned into a porn movement. And in the 1980s, you had a lot of comic porn films. And the retrospective includes 18 films representing the various periods of the films that came out of the Boca do Lixo, many of them in excellent new prints, prepared by the Cinemateca Brasileira. In particular, I would like to recommend The Margin by Oswaldo Condeas, which really started this movement. Condeas' film The Option, both of which are these poetic, surreal, very upsetting social dramas. Orgy, or The Man Who Gave Birth, which is a surreal and dazzling satire of just about every aspect of society imaginable. And a film called The Red Light Bandit, which is a hyperactive, anarchic comedy with melancholy undertones about a Robin Hood from the favelas, narrated by dueling radio announcers. And in a poll some years ago, the Cinemateca Brasileira rated The Red Light Bandit as the greatest Brazilian film of all time. So all these works are very, very exciting, and it's very exciting to see them happening here.
The Hidden Histories concerns the China independent documentary movement, which really gave rise over the last 10 or 15 years or so with the advent of digital filmmaking technology that basically, in theory, gave anyone with access to a video camera, a consumer-level video camera that they can buy in a store, the ability to make documentary films. And so this movement of like hundreds of documentaries started being made in China, just at the perfect time when China itself was undergoing this massive social transformation. Two programmers, Gerjan Zoelhoff and Gerwin Tomsma, have programmed several of these films, most notably the films by artist and activist Ai Weiwei, arguably China's most famous artist. He's the one responsible for designing the Olympic Stadium in Beijing. Just about the same time that his political notoriety started to give rise. 2008 was the Olympics, and at the same time there was the Sichuan earthquake, and which killed tens of thousands of people. And one of the controversial things that happened was that these schoolhouses had collapsed, killing hundreds of school children, and it was discovered that they were using faulty materials, and someone had pocketed the money that was meant to build solid schoolhouses. And so he took it upon himself to investigate why this happened. He went to that area, and as a result, he was beaten up by the police. And then that just sort of sparked his activist streak. And so he actually filmed himself answering the door the night that the police barged into his hotel room and beat him up. And that led to this documentary called Disturbing the Peace, where he systematically chronicles his experience dealing with the police, trying to understand why they did this to him, why they seem to be so resistant to his search for justice. And some people say, oh, it's just just this home video type documentary. There's nothing aesthetically of interest to it. But I beg to differ, because in his own way, he's kind of transformed the document of his experience into performance art. Because what he's continually confronting the authorities, and it's almost like a social experiment. How far can I take this, and protest on the rights of myself, my personal rights, and the rights of these school victims. And there's this fascinating 20-30 minute sequence where he goes into the local legal affairs bureau, basically talks his way into a meeting with one person who's kind of running interference for the real person, or so we think is the real person who can address the matter. And then finally, 20 minutes later, the real person comes in, he's kind of like, whatever. You know, he doesn't really take these guys seriously. And they keep coming up with like these, you know, nonsense reasons, trying to twist their logic around and being very evasive with their answers. But by the end of those 20 minutes, he's somehow managed to turn the tables and just be relentless in his questioning of this officer, so that we're no longer sure who's interrogating whom.
Yeah.
And this guy is really feeling hot on the collar. So it's basically like political performance art documented on this camera. And the fact that he's able to like do this is remarkable. And I think partly because he is such a big shot in the art world, and he's kind of looked out after, and he has such a big profile that other documentary filmmakers couldn't get as close, you know, to getting away with this sort of thing. He's sort of like to what independent documentary in China is, what George Lucas is to independent film in America, because he has such clout that he can take on these projects that no one else would even dream of doing. So and allows him to take it further.
The most important one for me was the James Benning Small Roads, because I'm a huge fan of Benning. Comprised of 47 shots of immobile shots of roads, basically small roads in America, mostly, well, California, Midwest, and the South. There is barely a human presence. I mean, there is some cars obviously are moving along. At some point we see, I think, 2 people crossing, but it's about mainly contemplating the landscape. And as with the best James Benning work so far, it manages to be both conceptual and experiential at the same time. Part of the fun of the movie is to figure out what the underlying structure of it is, and it isn't until very late in the movie that you actually see that the main organizing principle of it is basically following the seasons, because it ends with winter. It basically ends with those roads being totally covered with snow. And to hear Benning talking about it was very refreshing, because first of all, it was a great experience to see this movie with an audience that was extremely attentive to it. It was a packed screening, which is, I would say, an achievement in itself. People were very actively, you know, asking questions afterwards, and you have just witnessed a work that seems as minimalistic as can be, and then you actually Benning revealed how much visual manipulation went into that movie. I mean, how he tampered with some of the shots, how he actually combined several different shots into a single shot at times. For example, adding this, you saw it, right?
Yeah.
The storm, the lightning storm. That was a storm taken from a different shot, sort of put into the one, embedded into a one that he shot the day before.
Sure.
So it's all so seamless that as you are watching it, you seem to be, I mean, you feel as you are just witnessing nature. You just like feel almost as you were standing at the, you know, side of the road. But then you slowly realize how much aesthetic involvement and transformation went into that.
I don't feel like he's as appreciated in his own country as an American avant-garde filmmaker as he is here, because he routinely has films or special series here and installations in Berlin.
Right.
He just seems to be so much more revered here than in the U.S.
And I think that Benning's reputation in the United States is not bigger for much the same reason that a lot of the Brazilian films I've been covering have never gotten any attention from critics in the United States, because they're not available.
Right.
You know, it's really, really hard for people to see them. But for me, that's why it's okay, you know, to have a good movie playing here, even if it isn't an international premiere or premiere period, so that you can get someone here who's going to like it and write about it or try to play it somewhere else.
So it's really less an issue of the film itself as the surrounding culture that appreciates the film and nurtures it and kind of rallies around it. And I think this is kind of the through line, you know, whether it's the competition films we're talking about or these special series. And I think that really gets back to our first point about Rotterdam, why it's so special.
Yeah, well, look, there's a film in the Brazilian series called Sit on Mine and I'll Enter Yours. It's about, that's the title, and it's about a man who has a gigantic penis growing out of his forehead, who begins a romance with a woman who has a talking vagina. And this film is valuable. You know, there's nothing like it. And it's playing here. Now people know about it outside Brazil, and that's exciting.
Right.